It's June 24th, 2003, and we're at 87 Mechanic Street, Shelburne Falls, Mass. With David Arfa. David, maybe you could start by telling a little bit about where you grew up, and also your family background. I'd be curious to hear about grandparents and things, whatever you know, whatever you grew up hearing.
About where they lived in places.
Yeah, I can hold it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know, what's the family history as far as you know it on both sides?
Well, I grew up in Oak Park, Michigan. And let's see. That's in suburban Detroit. And my parents lived there, and they grew up there as well. And during their childhood, though in Detroit proper, as opposed to the suburbs. And their parents immigrated from a combination. On my mom's side was from Hungary and Germany, and my dad's side from Warsaw. My dad was a salesman, and my mom did a combination of office work and being at home and doing accounting work. And
Did you hear from the grandparents about, you know, where they come from? I mean, did you ever hear anything through the family?
No, unfortunately not. No. My grandparents, my mom's parents were both born in America, and so my mom's grandmother came when she was an infant in 1883 from Germany, and my mom's dad's parents came from Hungary, and I never knew them. I have a very brief memory. I know they were Orthodox, and my grandparents were not Orthodox, conservative, and from Warsaw as well. Both my grandfather, my dad's dad, came when he was a boy in 1906 and never met him. And my dad, I mean, we don't even know what the name Arfa, what it originally was. It was a shortened one, and you know, my dad wasn't of a generation that I was interested in asking. Though he did, yeah. I found out Arfa is Polish for grain merchant, though. So there's a little clue there. And there is stuff which I haven't explored, but, you know, Ellis Island has these genealogy records now. It's all online. You can get, and I went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. has incredible genealogy stuff. And can I hold it?
Yeah, I got it. Unless you
maybe let me try, because it might be a little more comfortable doing it this way.
Okay.
And is the sound all right like this if I hold it a little down? Okay, that's great. Thanks. So I actually found there's like 6 Arfas from Warsaw, but I haven't written them. They have a whole kind of secret writing system to keep their privacy. It goes through, I guess, the museum, and then they can choose to respond if they desire, the family, once they receive the letter. And I just haven't pursued it, but I'm curious to, because I went to Israel for a year and studied in yeshiva and interested in learning about Judaism and my own background and Jewish religious identity in particular. And my dad said, kind of matter-of-factly, after 3 months of being back home, after being a yeshiva, oh, my grandfather was a rabbi back in the old country. But he doesn't know anything about him.
Yeah.
And he didn't meet him. Mm-hmm. You know, my dad never met his grandfather.
Now, you were saying that in your growing up, your parents were conservative.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about in your childhood and adolescence, what form your Judaism took then,
Mm-hmm.
just in your family.
Sure. Well, I went to Hebrew school. went to some services when I was younger. My dad took me. He admitted, later took me for me, more than for him, just as a parent, introducing his child and children to synagogue life, and celebrated at home Hanukkah and Passover, Seders, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Those were my aunt celebrated Sukkot, my mom's sister, so we would go over to her house for a sukkah party, to be an outdoor party with full love. They built a hut on their porch, and it was lovely, and their kids decorated it with all sorts of great, crayon paintings and drawings and crepe paper all throughout, and pumpkins and gourds, I think, in the corners, things like that.
Yeah. Did you grow up in a relatively in the town, the suburban town? Were there a lot of Jewish people there?
In Detroit, there was, in Oak Park. Yeah, the school system closed on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and was really geared. I don't know how much, percentage-wise, but large percentage in the community in Oak Park. But then we moved to Minnesota when I was in 5th grade, and it's very, not the majority there at all, just a handful of Jews outside of Minneapolis. And then we moved back to Michigan to another suburb, and there was more Jews than Minnesota, but less than Oak Park.
But I take it you went to public school.
Went to public school.
So you were in a mixed environment.
Yeah.
Outside of the synagogue.
Yeah. And yeah.
I know. Growing up in that environment, I know certain things. I know that you, as an adult, maybe earlier, have developed an interest in being outdoors and environment. I'm wondering, when you were that age and you were living in a more suburban or urban setting, did you have hankering at that? I mean, did you go to summer camp or something like that?
Not a big hankering, but I guess something was there that, some instances in Minnesota. I was in the Boy Scouts and we went camping every month on a weekend camping trip, and that I just loved. And we did all sorts of different things, canoeing and bicycling and hiking, a big 2-week trip in the summertime, and where I kind of grew comfortable being outside and enjoyed it and learned that I enjoyed it. But otherwise, no, I didn't really think about.
And how about your
place
parents?
much, or
Did they have? Were they just completely happy living in that environment, or did they do certain things that led you to think that maybe, oh boy, they wish there was more green space around?
No, they were happy
Yeah.
being there. Green lawns, I think, were better than concrete in the city. So I think the initial, for them, I think suburban life had more of a park quality to it, than growing up in the city with apartment buildings and, apartment life. Backyards and eating outside and those kinds of things.
Now, you mentioned, I know I'm probably skipping way ahead here, but you mentioned having spent a year in Israel. Was that, how long ago was that? What age were you when you went there?
I was 24. I went for a year. 23, I went for a summer, and then I went back when I was 24.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, why you went, what you found.
Big question.
Yeah.
Is Well, I guess I initially went just for looking for to go see Israel and I looked into a semester in Israel as a junior at Michigan State, and it was very expensive, and I found a program in the summertime that was my 12th grade Hebrew school teacher wrote a letter about coming to Israel, being part of this program that was part of the Orthodox community, an Orthodox program. And I didn't know, he didn't use that word. He said, come and learn about Jewish history and Jewish philosophy and Jewish law and a traditional perspective. And I thought that kind of meant, okay, so we'll eat kosher, and that's what it means. And I didn't really know what entering an Orthodox community would be like. But that's so the summer program. It was a program with other college students, so about a dozen other students from Michigan, mostly, and it was 6 weeks altogether. 2 weeks in Moodus, Connecticut, at a kind of a camp, learning, being introduced to Talmud and just Jewish texts, Jewish life, and then 4 weeks in Jerusalem. And when I was there, it was 3 days of studying and 3 days of touring the country, doing things. And then on first Shabbat, we could actually ask who we wanted to spend Shabbat with, like someone in the army or a politician or a profession that you. And so I put down for an ecologist. It was someone, and there's a longish, could be a long answer, but through that I met a man, Rabbi Aryeh Carmel, who edited a book that was called Challenge, and it was the Association of Orthodox Jewish Scientists, and just a whole collection of different perspectives from the Orthodox community, from literalist interpretations, creationists, literalists of the Bible, to interpreters of the Bible, and scientists, but all struggling with questions of evolution and history of the universe and big questions that excited me a lot. And learning in yeshiva, this program was for skeptical college students, and the rabbis, most of them had secular educations as well as the rabbinic educations, and had chosen to become Orthodox as adults. And so as we were learning Jewish history, it would all be in context of learning Greek history, and in little bits, but it was just very wide sweeping study that I found just wonderful and engaging, and learning a lot about Jewish life. And the rabbis there all, they over and over, they said all of these rituals, these outer forms, also have inner components to them, of intentions behind them, and that was big news to me. And learning that and just living a life where I became familiar with prayer, because I was in a community where they prayed 3 times a day and just celebrating holidays. It just, that stuff was enough to get me to go back for the school year after I graduated from Michigan State. And really with the question of checking out this stuff, is this truth with a capital T or not? And by the end of the year, I didn't feel it was truth with a capital T, so I didn't stay. But I got tremendous just a tremendous love and appreciation for a Jewish tradition, and learning things I never learned, even going to 12 years of Hebrew school, just about the textual history of Judaism, and that there's this conversation that every generation is tapped into, and kind of just learning access to that's out there inspired me a lot.
Did you, in the course of that time, did you fall in love with the land of Israel? I mean, was that part of your experience? Or did you come to some...
I can't really say that I did. In fact, I remember making the comment to a friend that I sometimes wished the same program could have been in the States. As I look back on it, I'm totally glad I was able to be in Israel. But that was not... There were parts that were incredible. But at that time, it was not connected to place for me. So that was not the most important thing about what I was learning. And what I was learning, it did not... what I was learning, even though it was not connected with... So I never considered making Aliyah or moving there, or, I was not someone who was in that place.
Yeah. In other words, I guess the experience, the study experience, was not particularly enriched by it being in Israel.
It was. It was, and it was quite incredible. It definitely was. It definitely was. It was odd. I didn't relate to it. The program I was on, a lot of our field trips, for instance, were going into Bethlehem, and into Hebron and Kiryat Arba, the settlements in the West Bank, and I didn't really understand current politics when I was in college, and it was, we had guards around us, and we'd go and pray. We'd go do afternoon prayers at Rachel's tomb, for instance, or in Hebron, and there was an element that was very... I couldn't articulate any of it, but it was... it was an important part. I don't know. Interesting to come back. It was at a subconscious level of being there.
Yeah.
Part of the miracle of being in the Judean hills also, and then for Shabbat, the timing of Shabbat, where there's one song in Kabbalat Shabbat where Lecha Dodi, where you turn and bow, you turn towards the room. We had sliding glass doors behind us, and whether it was September or November, at the moment we turned and bowed, the sun was at the horizon. And I realized it was carefully timed. Each week it didn't, dawn on me till November. And being in the Judean hills, right outside of Jerusalem, was incredible. Also,
I've read, I can't remember which, there's one or another American Jewish writer visiting Israel talks about, might have been Philip Roth or somebody, the thing that these people couldn't get over about being in Israel was not so much the land, but that the cop directing traffic is a Jew, the guy in the supermarket is a Jew, the bus drivers, in other words, the demographic aspect, and I guess I can understand how that might, for people who are so used to being the minority, that might be kind of a transformative experience as opposed to necessarily feeling some specific holiness in the ground itself.
Yeah, I think so. And, for me, being in an Orthodox community, I didn't have that much connection with kind of everyday life of Israel in my experience there. Somewhat, I mean, used banks, and that it was incredible that, the streets would close down for Shabbat with barriers to allow walking around, and that the work week was centered around that was the day off, and things stopped for on Friday at noon, whatever, and through Shabbat. That was actually muted for me, though, of also just because being in an Orthodox community, there was this element of a community within a greater Israel. For me.
Now, since...
But there was, okay, so there was, and just thinking about it, like at the bus stop, I remember notions of giving tzedakah, of helping people out with charity, of having, I remember at the bus stop, it's a place where people coming, asking for money for the bus, getting in line at the bus, and then someone else, another beggar comes asking for money, and then the one who had just received money in the line also, gives over a little bit to the next person who came, and thinking that was a special thing. For me, that brought to life that kind of, the teachings trying to be lived for real at a level that
So maybe you could talk some about how, in the interim, I take it, you developed an interest in Judaism and the wilderness. I'm curious to hear how the whole evolution of that, and also how it plays into your storytelling.
Yeah. Sometimes I struggle with, answering very large questions of whether to enter into it, because it's actually, to me there's several different aspects of how it came to be. And there was first kind of an environmental consciousness that wasn't really place-based, but it was learning just about the natural world, because I studied it at Michigan State. I studied ecology and environmental policy, so I learned that where our air quality and our water quality and the world is connected, and it's impacted by how we live our lives. And going to Israel, I was learning. There was two aspects of learning about Judaism that really blew me away. One is that the Orthodox community that I was a part of was also very, they were anti-Western and anti-consumerism. And very openly talking about kind of America as where people, it's all about buying stuff. And they really were dedicated to living and creating their communities differently, to interacting with each other, and to having people over for meals and people didn't have TV. There wasn't the mass culture in the Orthodox community. Like, I grew up in suburban Detroit, where everything was TV and commercials and kind of mass-produced culture, food. I mean, everything was all, chains and outlets and and again commercials and music, and it was all what was marketed for us, and not even realizing that growing up in it, and so living in a community where people didn't have TVs, didn't know what movies were on, didn't listen to the radio, that was a very powerful thing, and very much just of trying to cultivate family life and walking together. Did a lot of walking, just walking with people, enjoyably up and down roads. That was one piece that just felt very different of being there, and very powerful. Just felt very, just felt that was great. And also learning through the year, kind of being there over the year, of learning of how many ways that Jewish ritual life connects us with what's going on in the natural world. Even though we didn't talk about it, because that kind of came out of this ecology program, it jumped out at me. Timing of prayers with just the rhythm of the day.
You mentioned the sun, when you were in the hills.
Yeah, that's right. For every week, and then even so, of coordinating morning prayers technically with the sunrise, of saying the Shema, right? You can't say the Shema before the sun hits the horizon in the morning. Of having weekly rhythms, having Rosh Chodesh, which is celebration of the new moon. We would go out the men go out and greet the waxing moon. There's a ceremony between like 3 days and 14 days of the moon, where you go and say Shalom Aleichem to the moon, and you jump, and all the men going out there doing this each month. Just the calendar is setting up, knowing what the dates are, where the first of the month is always the new moon, the mid-month is always the full moon, the end of the month the moon is waning. And having agricultural rhythms to the holidays, of having a holiday of Sukkot where you have to see the stars, of this appreciation at the time when you bring the harvest in, to remember that we didn't do it all ourselves. Having these reminders, and all the reminders of blessings, of blessings for rainbows and for flowers and different smells, and coming to the Mediterranean Sea, and coming to the ocean, and all these great, awareness, opportunities, and blessings that were and are there in the tradition. Blessing for just going to the bathroom in the morning, and then the pipes are working. Mm-hmm. It's just really. It just amazed me very much. And throughout, more than Sukkot, throughout the holidays, and they have agricultural, land-based connections to them. So kind of just being exposed to this, I really got it, how in a very deep way our tradition has this aspect to it, along with others, but that just connects us very, very deeply to the natural world, and to appreciating that we do not, we are not the masters here, and how to gearing to this place of appreciating the bounty that we have. And that movement, so in ecology, it's like, how do we move from feeling like masters of entitlement to everything that we have, to a place of living in a deep way from appreciation. I saw that here. There was Rabbi Jacobovitz, who was my rabbi in Michigan, who who brought me to Israel. One sec, I'll go.
Yeah. So,
Talk into there for the recording.
yeah, I'm gonna. I guess I wonder how some of those rituals carry over to your life now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how those, those sort of celestial events and harvest events, how they translate into your life here.
Mm-hmm. Well, before that, this is one story of Rabbi Chkovovitz. Yeah, of having that. He was on Shabbat. This was in Oak Park when I would go to his home for Shabbat. I noticed he went to the end of the sidewalk, and then he turned. He didn't cut across the grass on Shabbat. And I remember asking him because it was shorter just to cut across the grass, and he would say, "David Arfa, it's Shabbos, and on Shabbat we, don't destroy anything, So even the grass, walking on the grass, he was conscious of not doing that, and that just impacted me very much as well. That he never heard of Dave Foreman or Earth First or any kind of ecological consciousness in any way, but yet it was powerful enough. But he did have this consciousness that was very, very deep of not impacting the grass. And it went also to swimming. He said, "Don't swim," because of one thing I remember. Anyways, how I remember it was that the towel, and you might drip on the grass. So it's not only about destroying, but it's also helping it grow. That it's a day where humans, it's a zero impact day. It's like, whoa, that's pretty incredible. Now, for him and his family, also having a wonderful meal with 20 people and lots of styrofoam and creating, many bags of garbage afterwards, but just seeing the power of what that means of kind of to really cultivate consciousness, like that's to me in a deep level of what I got from this experience of being in the Orthodox community of religion as this consciousness worker, in very deep ways of, this is one aspect, but also of people, being in community together and having responsibility to each other. The rabbis would often say, in America, people wake up and say, what rights do I get, But in Jerusalem, it's about what's my responsibility to the community. It's a whole different orientation of approaching life in the day. So those things.
Yeah.
That's what really sunk in, was seeing this very deep path that was done in community. They weren't just ideas, but it was really that religion provided potentially a way for a community to really live the highest ideals that we can all aspire towards.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the community, that's right, for me to stay in. And I found that there was also very narrow sex roles there, and other aspects that were not for me, and that I didn't agree with. But I got this great love and appreciation for religious life, and the ability to kind of enter in and do kind of just go through our texts and maps of of the tradition, given these tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I wasn't intimidated by it, and could really just felt like it was mine.
Mm-hmm.
And so what a great gift I received.
I was asking in the same way that you're having learned that lesson then and there, how perhaps it translates now into you're at the point now of beginning to organize it seems like a new community with your 4 families, and so I'm wondering how those learning experiences are translating into how you live now. with an awareness of whatever it might be, minimizing the impact, being aware of not being the master of the environment.
I feel a lot of loss of and isolation and my own lack of ability to live up to very high ideals that our tradition sets out, as well as ecological reality sets out for us. And kind of the loss that, our the mainstream community in America is very far from aspiring to to those ideals. And I mean, it's a patchwork. I mean, I don't have any unified. It's hard. I don't. I think this is hard to answer because it's like there's the well, there's something about there's the world of idealism and of, in a way, abstract values striving for, and then there's the kind of just reality of life. The I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
Yeah. I'm wondering if maybe...
I mean, okay, so there's different aspects of Jewish identity, ecological consciousness, professional work, where they kind of dovetail together and they come in and out, and but I don't know how to talk about it really in some way. I mean, it's very big. I mean, of different parts of my life.
Yeah. It sounds to me maybe as though partly the experience with this community in Israel, there was such a strong base in spirituality among those people that even in that situation that was an ideal, people were working towards an ideal, there was a base for it. There was almost like a consensus among people. And just sort of extrapolating that here, without that base, it's harder to, at least on a communal level, it's harder maybe to realize those ideals because of the isolation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idealism that I felt was also compounded. I mean, the idealism was the idealism of the school community. You know, that's in some sense the purest of folks, the rabbis there, the people who came and taught there. Those were the folks that were really maybe at the highest level of trying to live out this stuff.
Yeah.
Because there's also, you know, just in everyday life, there's the full variety of, you know, hustlers and con men and thieves and crooks and the whole works, you know, of life.
Yeah.
Here, I mean, what it gave me was this great foundation of trust in, is it that, Eva? But not for playing with it. If you want to play, you can go show. Get the camera over there. Boxes.
Somebody's just walking in.
Yeah, that's Kim. Kim's here.
Do you want to take a break?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to hold it, or do you want?
Yeah. Maybe.
Okay. There's lots of wire here.
Okay, great.
Go as far away or as close as you like. Okay.
What I'm realizing is that there's these different aspects to this, to my experience, that it's not, they don't merge together very easily. That I have both kind of my development of my ecological consciousness, moving to a place-based awareness, if you will, or the importance of being someplace in particular as part of that, my identity is out of one strand that has many pieces of how that developed, as well as the Jewish aspect of just learning about Jewish heritage in the Orthodox community, and then going on this whole path of where I kind of learned that one, that it's my heritage, and that I can participate in it, and I can feel free with participating and making decisions of how I want my Jewish life to be. And that I can look at Jewish history and the wide, tremendous diversity and variety of Jewish life for role models. And seeing that there is this very large, though underrepresented aspect of connections with the natural world in Jewish tradition. This whole other aspect, as well as of the again, I'm trying to bring them together, and it's just not. They're not always connected. There's just some overlap, but there's whole other aspects of just how to say it.
Well, maybe let me just. I'll ask you. Somehow or other, you and Kim ended up here in this community. I take it that somebody doesn't live in a place like this unless it's a deliberate choice.
Yeah, definitely.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about how and why a place like this. Even if it is arbitrary or was arbitrary. I mean, it's just coming to mind, for instance, we're about to walk through this cemetery here, and I'll venture a guess that there isn't a single Jewish person buried among these hundreds of people, and you want the history of this place, here it is. Here are all the people who used to live here. Let's guess that not one is Jew. So how do...
Well, I guess it comes back to that my Jewish identity is... well, maybe there's it's like my Jewish identity is not my only decision maker or identity maker or there's still, I think there's a whole other aspect of Jewish life of just feeling my own participation in Jewish life has been very important and very liberating of my own kind of to anchor me, to give me confidence to be in some ways to just participate in Jewish. That there's tremendous, the work of years of developing the permission for myself of I don't know how we ended up here. We ended up here. Kim lived here in the mid '80s, and then Kim lived here in the mid '80s, and I met Kim in Philadelphia, outside of the city, in the early '90s, and wanting to choose to.
When you say lived here, you mean in Shelburne Falls? Or?
She lived in Sunderland,
Uh-huh.
and so Western Massachusetts. Western Massachusetts feels like the region here. Mm-hmm. When we first moved here in '96, we lived in Greenfield for a year, and then moved to Shelburne Falls, and been here ever since. So, this whole strand of the importance of place. So here in particular, Kim knew about this area. She moved back here for graduate school in the early 90s to go to landscape architecture at UMass. And I was teaching high school outside of Philadelphia. Visiting her is when I discovered this region and this whole beautiful place here. It's gorgeous here. And it's this whole region of small towns with universities and progressive values all combined together, and Jewish life for that matter.
So yeah, I was gonna.
Not big city Jewish life, but Jewish life of having synagogues and adult ed offerings and scholars coming in for a little bit, and that was all perks. That wasn't the deciding factor, but that was definitely part of it. If we were in beautiful rural America that had no Jewish life, or was the heart of fundamentalist belief, it certainly wouldn't feel the same, and doubt we would have stayed.
Yeah, you mentioned something about, I guess, the progressive values or something like that. Does it feel like in your, I guess going on almost 10 years experience of living in Western Massachusetts, does it seem like culturally leaving Jewishness in or out of the picture, that this is a distinct area in that way, that living in a place like this really is hugely different from living in any other rural part of America?
Yeah, I don't think there are many spots like this through the country where there are there's an active Yeah, yeah.
What do you think makes it that way? I mean, how did it get that way? Why isn't it like eastern Nebraska or any number of other places?
Well, I mean, I think having 5 universities shifted the energy here, if you will, over the past 20 years, 30 years. So in the 70s, of people coming to school here and having enough kind of critical mass, having large universities, having UMass and others as well, having that people staying here, I think is one aspect of just building up a critical mass. I don't know really how it developed, but I do see it, and I'm actually quite amazed that through seemingly chance, of in our community, for instance, having another family who um, I mean, it feels like it's not only a progressive area, but it's also a progressive religious area as well. Of having Jamie as a Christian educator. I'm having a hard time talking about how to describing these things right now. So I'm sorry for the.
Oh, that's fine.
This feeling.
Well, I'll ask you.
Okay,
try
great.
Another avenue.
You bet. You bet.
You're out. You have a few hours, and you're out hiking somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you had the luxury of you're by yourself or something like that. Do you have thoughts, for instance, of what are you thinking about in particular? Do you ever go out into the woods and think of certain texts? I mean, do you pause sometimes and think of a certain text from Torah or something like that? Does that happen to you when you're out in nature, for lack of a better word? Or are you like me and you're just thinking, okay, I got to get to the top of this hill? You're concentrating on, just putting one foot in front of the other.
No. Again, the dovetailing. One thing one example of, for me, of thinking of different Jewish blessings as I walk, and there's one of the Shechianu blessing that is of an appreciation for coming to this time once again, for this year. So it's said traditionally through all different things. On Rosh Hashanah is a great opportunity to eat new fruits. And when we come to the first food of eating it for the year, you get to say the Shechianu prayer, getting new clothing. It's an opportunity to say Shechianu, that here, come to this place again. And so I think of that a lot on many times as I'm walking, of looking at just as discovering the seasons changing around me, of seeing, if it's late winter, as the snow melts, as I see birds building nests. Mm-hmm. I see insects coming out. The first mosquitoes of the year are all kind of ways, in a just a really small way, for me, of marking that, of birds coming as the juncos leave for the winter. They go back up north for the winter, as when they come back in the fall, at different markers, the maple time, the maple sap, and having it so throughout the year. I think there's a...
And these things adapt well to wherever one is.
That's right.
They can be
absolutely
transposed from any environment to any other environment.
Absolutely. So for me, that's and maybe this is a small example of an overlap of what I'm finding hard to talk about in any kind of big picture way. There's a piece of what is place-based mean to me, of what that means living in a place. Why is that important to me? Mm-hmm. There's this whole ecological understanding of why that's important. And I see also Jewishly that is supported through very particular, rituals, blessings, and prayers and opportunities. And so they dovetail together. Maybe it might be good for writing down, like thinking of questions and how to write about it, because there's a whole constellation of different things to talk about and how to choose what's the most what's the clearest way to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Is for me kind of today is harder talking about it than maybe with the microphone. I don't know what it is. But with that said, sense of place is this aspect that I've discovered within environmental education that looks about kind of what does it mean in the big picture of thinking globally and acting locally. What does that mean of not only activism locally, but what does it mean understanding where we live, of who our neighbors are, not only in our human neighbors, but also of where do we live, of the trees and the birds that live here. And these are, again, goals that over my life hope to, it's a lifetime of getting to know your neighbors, to learn these things. But there's ecologically, to me, what that means is like being in a place to understand what the natural rhythms are. Specifically, what are the trees that live here? What are the birds that live here? What are what's the geological history of the soil? How's the river, the Deerfield River here, come to be? What are the issues with salmon and the Connecticut and the shad, and the impact of the dams here and the history of the dams, and understanding the human history of how we dovetailed with the natural world and impacted the natural world, and to begin then thinking about a course into the future, of what does it mean to live sustainably and to start having less impact on the earth. Those issues, if you're not connected with any particular place, then it doesn't really matter. growing up in suburban Detroit, one thing that I realized as I look back is I could have been anywhere, number one, and I just had very little interaction of any kind with the natural world. I mean, very in small ways. I did, my backyard and playing games, some camping trips, but certainly there wasn't. It wasn't present in any meaningful way to say, okay, as making decisions in our life to consider the natural world, to consider our relationship with where we live. And there's a piece for me of believing that, influenced by again, so the idealism of living in a place long enough to know where we live and know, of all aspects of where we live, of the economy of where we live, and its impact of. There's a challenge of. Talking about this. I mean, there's a place where it just goes to the biggest of the big, and I just have a hard time getting it out to you.
Well,
maybe we can continue another time.
Sure, and I mean, it may seem to you like you're not getting anywhere, but I've absorbed a huge amount of insight from what you've said. So maybe it feels like fits and starts to you. I've learned a great deal. So you can set any self-consciousness aside. I guess we should. We're getting run over there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can, this may pertain or may not pertain, but the community that you're looking to start is 4 families.
Yep.
Right? And I guess how important is Judaism in is that a factor at all in the composition of the community? Just, is there provision for Shabbat together, or that sort of thing?
Not directly, but it is important in the sense that everyone is comfortable with having Shabbat and would love to come over. Mm-hmm. If there's another family that does with also Shabbat regularly, and others that also part of our enjoyment of each other is an appreciation of that we all just have, that we can all kind of gain personal, that we all enjoy our religious lives, and also that we all enjoy being finding meaning within our religious lives, personal meaning in the community, direction, kind of appreciating these old texts that many people feel are kind of old and crusty, but also of appreciating just the search of exploring them and finding where there is pertinent directions and wisdom for our lives. And feeling comfortable enough to do that and to ignore, sort out, not pay attention to the parts that we don't find so much value in. And that's a big deal. I think that's this whole, I would say there's this whole kind of mystical path, if you will, of finding Jewish mysticism as this path of experiential religion. I'm cut across with safety here.
Yeah.
There might be someone turning in here, but
It's a good sound effects.
that's right.
Tour bus.
That's right. That's right. Here we are, back to downtown in the city once again.
I've never done this before. I like this.
Thank you for your willingness to carry
no,
it.
It's a pleasure.
But that piece, this notion of experiencing religious life, like what does it feel like on the inside of our bodies? There's all this stuff that the mystics were the path breakers and explorers in religious communities. So in Judaism and in Christianity and in other traditions, that they're the ones who are exploring. People talk about what does it mean to be close to God, quote unquote. But what is that? What is that even about? It's so hard, so abstract. So the mystics have all these teachings of that there is this experiential journey within us, and that we're all that's open to all of us to have that, to be on that path. And my background is in experiential education as a teacher, and seeing the importance of education as a student needs to be able to get inside what's learning for it to be transformative. And environmental education particularly, how do you teach something that people will really change? We can live so much with ideas running around in our head. Well, to me, that was one of the big marriages and bridges. That was just an automatic aha. Oh, there's this path here of experiential religion, the same way of how. What is it? It's a whole different. It looks very different, It looks very different than here are the rules, top down. This is what to learn. Memorize this and do it, and bring it back by rote. Versus
take the compost out. And yeah, I think I know what you mean.
Yeah, taking the compost out is like, right, living in the community. Most kids, that's something that kids should learn when they're 4, about the compost pile and recycling bins, and not learning recycling bins. They are learning now at 4, and some kids compost bins. But when I was in school, recycling, no one recycled. Now that's small success.
In the broadest sense, it does seem to me from my limited religious knowledge that Judaism really is, in large part, a religion of experience and of this world. There's so much invested in this world, and so it seems to be a ritual practice and a tradition that lends itself well to.
Should we go just a little bit around the backyard here?
Sure.
Let's finish this piece up. Yes. Absolutely.
Making this world a better place.
And so that's another key piece of the combination of studying environmental education and learning, that there are these aspects of activism and life changes of choosing different paths that are things like of composting, of recycling, the everyday reality to change our life of, not attempting to live simpler, using less energy. And that being clearly the same goal in the Jewish community, that here are these ideals. How do we do it every day? Like, and if it's not okay for every day, then it's not, it does not work. And the teaching is all about how do we bring it into our life. And so all these rituals of getting, when I was in yeshiva, that these are all reminders for what are we trying to remember to actually do. It's not enough just to do the reminder. That's like, but you have to do the action. So there's these teachings, what's better, someone who spends 60 years learning or 40 years learning, 20 years doing, deeds of loving kindness. And of course, the person who's acting the deeds, you need to have wisdom, in the traditional teachings to know how to act. But yet the action is what is most important. And the same with how do we shift our whole culture, away from massive amounts of consumption and reliance on petroleum and chemicals, how do we begin to shift on that? That's a huge momentous change that's happening, that's going on, that needs to happen and going on. And for me, I see it's totally informed by the process of learning about religious life, that attempt. But then it's shifted. So there are rabbis like talking about the word eco-kashrut has popped up, eco-kosher, about looking at, okay, let's take this notion of a specialized diet for holiness, remembering holiness, but let's shift it a little bit, to say that maybe an apple that's wrapped on a styrofoam tray with, plastic around it, maybe that's not kosher. So it's kind of using a traditional form and then bending it a little bit. And then it's getting to the point of there's tremendous potential with that, but then again it comes to how we find the ways to live it as well, and that there's tremendous long ways to go. What we ideally you can also talk about Shabbat is this whole time where, like with Rabbi Jacobitz, of not destroying anything. Like that kind of consciousness, trying to integrate that where there's no electricity used. And you really go back, which is a very traditional form, though in the Orthodox community, some will leave certain lights on. But, to see them, or the stove on low, or, having the TV on a remote control. So they're not turning it on, and they set it before Shabbos, but they can watch their favorite show, which is great. And it's this very powerful consciousness system of real respect for Shabbat. And then also you can kind of see that creating a kind of need to use our creative juices to insert, ideas of ecological consciousness in your full day. And having it this one day, that's this reminder where won't be using money or electricity, and of thinking, not using a computer, living to the point of there's that life of potential to move into. And so it's totally, I was saying earlier that it's totally informed by the structure of, seeing Jewish religious life, seeing directly addressing similar questions to kind of my education in ecology and environmental education. How do we change? In Jewish life, there is this search for bringing the Messiah in this perfected world that ends hatred and greed and misery, and there's a utopian view with an environmental. What does that look like? Of this, sustainable path that is harmony with the natural world, and how do we get there? And that religious life, what inspires me so much, as well as that it says life is primarily about celebration. And then also, we always need to be striving for justice. And also emotional fullness as well. And to me, that is very important, again, within ecological community or consciousness. I don't even know words to describe it, but it can get focused on activism and urgency and working with the environmental organization, which is so important, but it's not a whole life. How do we bridge and combine the celebration along with, and necessitating that it's crucial to be activists, to be citizens, and here it's again a religious system teaching, of course, it's all a matter of expectation and, proper way of being. Whereas growing up in suburban Detroit, not seeing actually many models of public participation at all, actually, which is one of the things that I'm always trying to bring more into my life, into my balance.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.